The Mafia boss found his waitress asleep at work. The next thing he did stunned everyone. The restaurant was empty. Not the kind of empty that happens between the dinner rush and the late crowd. The permanent kind. Tables wiped, chairs pushed in, the kitchen dead quiet behind the metal pass. The last server had clocked out 40 minutes ago. The bartender had gone home with his coat half on. Even the music had stopped, though nobody remembered turning it off. Elena Vasquez was still there. She was 26 years old and running on 4 hours of sleep and a cup of gas station coffee that had stopped working somewhere around 9 in the evening. She had been on her feet since 6 in the morning, not at this restaurant, but at the bakery 3 blocks east, where she loaded trays and rang up orders until 2 in the afternoon, then went home, changed, ate half a sandwich standing over the kitchen sink, and came here. She did this 5 days a week, sometimes 6. She had been wiping down the corner booth for a long time. Her hand was still moving in slow circles across the vinyl, but her eyes were closed. She did not mean to fall asleep. That was the thing she would think about later, in the way you think about things you cannot change. She had sat down for just one moment, just to take the weight off her feet, just for a second, and her body had made a decision without her. The order pad was still in her hand when she went under. Dominic Reyes arrived at 20 minutes past midnight. He came through the back entrance, the way he always did when he came after hours, which was often. He owned this restaurant. He owned the building it sat in, the 2 buildings on either side, and a dry cleaning business across the street that had not cleaned a single piece of clothing in 11 years. He was 38 years old and had the kind of face that made people choose their words carefully around him, not because he was unkind, but because he noticed everything, and people sensed that he noticed everything, and that awareness made them cautious. He was not supposed to be here tonight. He had meetings that ran late, and a car that should have taken him straight home. But something had shifted in him around 11, a restlessness he did not have a name for, and he had told the driver to come here instead. He walked through the back hallway and into the main dining room and stopped. The room was clean. The lights were dimmed to the lowest setting. Everything was in order, except for the woman asleep in the corner booth. He stood still for a moment, and the expression on his face was the one he wore when he was calculating. Quiet, careful, unreadable. He looked at the door. He looked at the bar. As he looked at the clock on the wall above the host stand, which read 12:22. Then he looked back at her. Elena Vasquez had worked at this restaurant for 7 months. He knew this because he knew the employment records of every person on his payroll. He knew her full name, her address in the Bronx, the fact that she had never been late, had never called out sick, had never once asked for an advance on her wages. He knew she picked up extra shifts when other people called out, which was often, and that the kitchen staff liked her because she never complained and never sent food back for the wrong reasons. He did not know why she was still here at midnight on a Tuesday, with her cheek pressed against the vinyl of a booth that should have been empty for 2 hours. He walked toward her slowly. She did not stir. Her breathing was even and deep, the breathing of someone who had not slept properly in a long time and had finally found a moment where her body simply refused to continue. Her dark hair had come loose from its tie and lay across one shoulder. The order pad in her hand was wrinkled from being gripped in her sleep. He stood at the edge of the booth and looked at her for a long moment. The anger that had arrived first, the precise, controlled kind, the kind that came automatically when things in his restaurant were not as they should be, had already begun to leave him. He noticed this without understanding it. He was not a man who lost his anger easily. He was not a man who stood over sleeping employees at midnight feeling something he could not name. And yet, he pulled off his jacket. It was a dark wool blazer, well made, the kind that cost more than 3 of Elena's shifts put together. He folded it once and laid it over her carefully. The way you lay something over a person when you do not want to wake them. She shifted slightly at the warmth, a small sound leaving her lips, and he went completely still. She did not wake. He stood there for another moment. Then he went to the bar, poured himself 2 fingers of scotch from the bottle he kept on the top shelf, and sat on the stool at the far end, where he could see the whole room. He told himself he was staying because it was a security matter, because an employee had fallen asleep on the premises and someone had to be here when she woke. because it was the responsible decision. He almost believed this. He sat there for 55 minutes. He finished the scotch and did not pour another. He looked at his phone once, answered one message, put it back in his pocket. The room was very quiet. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigeration unit behind the bar and, occasionally, the soft shift of Elena's breathing from across the room. There was something strange about the stillness. Dominic Reyes lived in a world of noise, conversations that were never quite what they appeared to be, rooms full of men who smiled while calculating, phones that rang at hours no phone should ring. Quiet was not something he encountered often. Real quiet, the kind that sat still and did not demand anything from him. He looked at her from across the room. She looked very young, asleep, and very tired, in the way that sleep doesn't fully erase, a tiredness that had settled into the bones and stayed there. He thought about her employment file, about the fact that she had never been late, about the kind of discipline it takes to never be late when you are this tired. When Mateo came in at 1:10, Mateo, who handled security for 3 of Dominic's buildings, and had worked for him for 9 years, and had learned to find him wherever he disappeared to, he stopped in the doorway and looked at the scene in front of him. His boss, alone at the bar. A woman asleep in the corner booth, covered with a jacket he recognized. Mateo was not a man who asked unnecessary questions. But something shifted in his face in that moment, something quick and quiet, a thing he filed away carefully without comment. "Car is outside," Mateo said. "Give me a minute," Dominic said. He took an envelope from the inside pocket of the jacket he had taken from Elena before he stood. He counted out the bills, her night's tips, doubled, in cash. He set the envelope on the bar top where she would see it in the morning. He did not leave a note. He stood there for a moment looking at the envelope, and he thought about what he might have written, and he could not think of a single sentence that was honest, and also something he was willing to put on paper. He picked up the jacket that was covering her carefully, replaced it with the bar's folded table linen that was stacked on the pass, and walked toward the back. At the door, without knowing why, he turned and looked at her one more time. Then he left. Elena woke at 2:17 in the morning. She came up out of sleep the way you do when you don't know where you are, fast and confused, the order pad falling from her hand and hitting the floor, her heart already going before her eyes were fully open. She sat upright in the booth and looked around the empty restaurant, and the first thing she felt was pure dread, the specific dread of someone who has made a mistake they cannot undo. She had fallen asleep at work. She pressed both hands flat on the table and took a breath. The dining room was empty. The lights were still dimmed. Someone had placed a folded cloth over her. She looked at it without understanding it, and the clock above the host stand said 2:17. She stood up, straightened her uniform, and picked up the order pad. She found the envelope on the bar when she went to get her bag. She opened it slowly, the way you open things when you are not sure what is inside. She counted the bills twice. She stood at the bar for a long time, looking at the money. There was no note. There was nothing to tell her who had left it or why, but the amount was exact. Her usual tips, doubled, down to the dollar, and there was only one person who would know that number. Only one person who came here after midnight with access to her records, and a reason to know what she had earned that night. She put the money in her bag. She put on her coat. She walked to the door and stood there with her hand on the handle for a moment, looking back at the empty room. Then she stepped out into the cold and walked to the subway and went home. She did not sleep on the train, even though she was still exhausted. She sat with her bag in her lap and looked at nothing and thought about nothing in particular and felt, without being able to explain it, that something had changed tonight in a way she could not yet see the shape of. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself this very firmly, the way you tell yourself things you already know are not quite true. The next morning, the gossip started before the first coffee was brewed. Elena walked through the back door of the restaurant at 10:55, 5 minutes before the lunch shift, and the kitchen went quieter, in the way kitchens go quiet when someone has just been talked about. Leon, the line cook who had worked at this location longest, and treated gossip as a professional responsibility, was the one who told her. He was here, Leon said, not looking up from the cutting board. After close, sat at the bar for almost an hour. Elena tied her apron. Who? Leon gave her a look. Who do you think? She did not answer. Marco, from the late delivery, saw his car outside at 1 in the morning. Leon continued. Driver and everything. Just sitting there. She smoothed the apron flat and picked up her order pad. People can sit wherever they want. Yeah, said Leon. Except he doesn't. He comes in. He does what he came to do. He leaves. He doesn't sit. Not for an hour. He finally looked at her. You were still here when he arrived, weren't you? It was not a question. She could see in his face that he already knew, or had guessed close enough to the truth that the distinction barely mattered. She thought about the envelope. She thought about the folded cloth placed over her in the booth. I lost track of time, she said. Leon looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. Right, he said. Then he went back to his cutting board and said nothing else, which was somehow louder than anything he could have said. She walked out to the floor. Her section had been rearranged. She stopped in the middle of the dining room and looked at it. The corner booth, her corner booth, where she had spent half her shift for the past 7 months, and had apparently also slept, had been removed from her rotation. In its place was a small two-top near the window, freshly polished, menus straight. She stood looking at it for a long moment. Her manager, Patrick, was at the host stand going through the reservation list. He was a compact, anxious man in his 40s, who held his clipboard like a shield. When he looked up and saw her expression, he looked immediately back down at his papers. Why was my section changed? She asked. Management decision, Patrick said, without looking up. Which management? He still didn't look up. The decision came down this morning. That's all I know. She looked at the two-top by the window for another moment. Then she went to her first table. She thought about it all through the lunch rush, between orders, between the kitchen and the floor, in the 30-second pauses that were the only privacy a server ever got. She thought about what it meant that she had not been fired. She thought about what it meant that someone had covered her with a cloth and left money in an envelope and rearranged her section, and still not left a single word of explanation. She thought about the fact that it could only have been Dominic Reyes. She had seen him in this restaurant exactly 19 times. She had counted, though she would not have admitted this to anyone. She served him each time with the same professional efficiency she brought to every table, and each time he treated her the way he treated all service staff, with a flat, impersonal courtesy that was neither warm nor cold. He said please and thank you. He did not complain. He tipped exactly 15%, never more, never less, and he never looked at her for longer than the conversation required. He was not the kind of man you noticed if you were being smart. He was not loud. He did not take up physical space the way some powerful men did, puffing themselves into rooms. He was simply very still and very watchful, and the stillness itself was the thing that made people pay attention. She had been paying attention. She would not have admitted this either. He came in that evening at 8, which was not unusual. He had 3 men with him, not unusual either. They sat at the back table, the one that was always held for him whether or not a reservation had been made, because Patrick understood some things without being told them. Elena took a breath and walked to the table. Dominic looked up at her when she arrived. His gaze lasted exactly as long as necessary. He ordered the same thing he always ordered. The lamb, medium, the house red, sparkling water, without looking at the menu. The men with him ordered. She wrote everything down. She said she would be right back. She walked away. He did not look at her when she brought the drinks. He did not look at her when she brought the food. He was in the middle of a conversation that stopped and stopped again the way conversations do when what is being discussed cannot be said directly, and his attention was fully and completely on the men across from him. She refilled the water once. He said thank you without looking up. She went back to the floor. Partway through the meal, without quite meaning to, she let her eyes go to his table. He was listening to one of the other men speak, his chin slightly down, one hand resting flat on the table. He had a particular way of listening that was not like other people's listening. It was more like collecting, like every word was being filed somewhere careful and permanent. Then his eyes moved, just slightly, and found hers across the room. She looked away immediately. She went to table 4 and asked if they needed anything else. At the end of the night, when his table had gone and she was clearing it, she found the tip. Not 15%. Not the precise, unchanged amount she had come to expect from him. More. Not dramatically more. Not in a way that would make anyone else notice if they were watching. But more. She stood at the cleared table with the bills in her hand. Behind her, the door to the back hallway opened, and she heard Patrick's voice, low and careful, speaking to someone. Then a different voice, one she did not recognize. She turned slightly, not enough to seem like she was listening. She should understand, the unfamiliar voice said. It's not personal. There are ways these things work. Of course, Patrick said, in the tone he used when he was agreeing with something he was afraid to disagree with. Elena put the money in her apron pocket and carried the tray back to the kitchen. She moved efficiently and did not look toward the hallway again. That night, walking to the subway, she pulled her coat tighter against the cold and thought about the voice she had heard. She thought about the word, understand. She thought about the precise way it had been used, not as an invitation to understanding, but as something close to a warning. She bought a Metro card at the machine and swiped through the turnstile. She thought about Dominic Reyes's eyes finding hers across the room. She thought about the money in her apron. She had 3 jobs and a brother to keep fed and rent. That was $200 more than it should have been for an apartment with a bathroom door that didn't fully close. She did not have space in her life for complications. She did not have room for things that felt like warnings delivered in quiet voices to her anxious manager. But she was still thinking about it when the train pulled in. She was still thinking about it when it pulled away. 2 days later, a woman appeared at the host stand just before the dinner shift. She was well-dressed, composed, and she asked for Elena by name, with the pleasantness of someone delivering news they have carefully prepared. She said she was calling on behalf of the restaurant's ownership. She said there was a transfer opportunity available, a newer location in a better neighborhood, with a significant increase in base pay. She said it was entirely Elena's choice, of course. She smiled when she said of course. Elena looked at her for a long moment. I'll think about it, Elena said. The woman's smile stayed exactly where it was. Please don't take too long, she said. She left. Elena watched her go through the glass front door and get into a black car that had been waiting at the curb. She stood at the host stand and felt, with complete clarity, that she had just been offered something that was not actually an offer. She understood this the way you understand things that are communicated in the space between the words, in the particular quality of someone's smile, and the car that is already waiting outside. She went to table 7 and took their order, and smiled, and said the specials, and did not let a single thing show in her face. Inside, she was doing the math. The kind of math that had nothing to do with tips or hours or Metro cards. The kind that told you when a situation had become something other than what it appeared to be on the surface, and what your options were once you understood that, and what it cost to choose each one. She had been doing that kind of math her whole life. She was very good at it. 3 weeks passed. In those 3 weeks, Elena served Dominic Reyes 6 more times. She brought his lamb medium, and his house red, and his sparkling water. She said as usual, and he said yes, without looking up from whatever conversation he was having. She refilled the water. She brought the check. He signed it. He left. She did not take the transfer. Nobody mentioned it again. The woman with the composed smile did not return. Patrick continued to avoid her eyes whenever possible, which was a change from before, when he had simply ignored her the way managers ignore staff who give them no reason for attention. The shift was subtle, but Elena noticed subtle things. She had been trained by years of necessity to notice them. She noticed other things too, in those 3 weeks. Small things, insignificant things, individually. The way her section stayed the way it was after being rearranged. No further changes, no explanations. The way the kitchen never ran short on her orders anymore, even on busy nights when other servers were waiting 20 minutes for their table's food. The way Leon, who gossiped compulsively about everything, had gone completely quiet on the subject of Dominic Reyes. She noticed that when Dominic arrived, the room shifted slightly. Not in a dramatic way, not in the way of someone who demanded attention. It was more like the way a room shifts when the temperature drops a degree. People stood a little straighter, spoke a little more carefully, chose their paths through the dining room with more precision. She noticed that she was the only one who seemed to relax when he walked in. This disturbed her more than anything else. She was wiping down the bar one evening in the middle of the week, when the kitchen door opened and Leon came out, not in his work clothes but in the jacket he wore when he was done for the day. He stopped at the bar and looked at her. "Elena," he said. She kept wiping. "Leon." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very carefully, in the way of someone who has decided to say a thing and is committed to it now, "You know what kind of man he is." She did not pretend not to know what he meant. "Yes." "Good," Leon said. Then he put on his jacket and went out the back. She finished wiping the bar. She did know what kind of man Dominic Reyes was. She had known from the first week she worked here, because she had grown up in a neighborhood where certain things were visible if you knew how to look, and she had learned how to look early. She knew what the back table meant, and the car always at the curb, and the way certain conversations stopped when she refilled the water. She knew what kind of business operated inside the structure of a legitimate business, and she knew the signs of it the way you know the signs of weather, by the specific quality of the air. She was not naive. She had never been naive. What she had not expected was this: the cloth laid over her in a booth at midnight, the money in the envelope with no explanation, the quiet rearrangement of small things around her, the way he said thank you, every single time, in exactly the same voice he used for everything. Flat, courteous, a little removed, and yet somehow it did not feel impersonal. It felt like the opposite of impersonal. It felt like a very controlled version of something that was not controlled at all. This was what kept her turning things over at 2 in the morning, when she should have been asleep. On a Thursday, her brother came to the restaurant. His name was Hector, and he was 17, and the most important person in Elena's life, which was a fact she had accepted so completely that it had stopped being a decision and become simply a condition of her existence, like the cost of rent and the cost of groceries and the precise calculation of how much her body could do before it stopped working. He was a junior at the high school, 3 stops down the subway line. He was good at math, and he was trying very hard to be a person who did not get into trouble in a neighborhood that offered trouble with a persistence that bordered on professional. She saw him through the glass front 30 seconds before he hit the door. She saw, in those 30 seconds, the set of his shoulders and the way he was walking. Not casual, not the specific loose-jointed walk he performed when he was trying to appear relaxed. Tense. Moving fast. She saw his face when he pushed through the door. There was a bruise coming up along his jaw. Fresh. She was already moving. She crossed the floor in a direction that was not toward him. She did not cross the dining room directly, because there were tables and people and eyes, but toward the hallway to the left of the kitchen, and she caught his arm as he came past the host stand and steered him gently but firmly into the back without breaking her stride. Patrick saw this from the bar and said nothing. In the hallway, she put both hands on his shoulders and looked at him. "Talk," she said. He talked. She listened. The story came out in pieces, not in order. The way frightened people tell stories. The names of 2 boys from the neighborhood. A disagreement about something small that had escalated into something not small. A push that became a punch. Hector, on the ground outside the bodega on Morris Avenue. It had happened an hour ago. He had come here because it was the only place he could think of. She got him water from the kitchen. She pressed the back of her hand gently against the bruise on his jaw. She listened to the rest of it. "Okay," she said when he was done. "Okay." "Are you going to say I should have walked away?" he said. "I know you tried to walk away," she said. "I know what you look like when you're lying about that, and this isn't what it looks like." Something in his face loosened. She told him to stay in the break room, eat something from the staff tray, wait for her until the end of her shift. She straightened her uniform and walked back out to the floor. She did not look toward the back table, but she knew without looking that Dominic Reyes had been there for 40 minutes, and that his seat faced the hallway entrance, and that he saw everything. This was the kind of thing she knew about him now, the way you know things about people you have been watching without meaning to watch. She smiled at table 9 and asked if they were ready to order, and did not let her hands shake even though they wanted to. She got through the rest of the shift. She got through it efficiently and without incident, and with her face completely composed. And when the last table had gone and Hector was standing outside the back door with his jacket on, she walked him to the subway and they rode home together, and she made him ice his jaw, and she sat on the edge of his bed and watched him fall asleep, with the particular feeling that comes from loving someone in a world that does not make loving them easy. She lay down on her own bed at midnight and did not sleep. And then, 6 days later, she heard through Leon, who heard through Marco, who heard through a man named Curtis, who ran numbers out of a laundromat 2 blocks from the school, that the 2 boys from the bodega incident had quietly disappeared from the neighborhood. Not dead, not gone forever, just moved on, suddenly, without explaining to anyone why. Curtis's exact words, as relayed through 2 people before reaching Elena. Somebody talked to them, real politely. Elena sat with this information for 11 minutes in her car outside the restaurant before her shift started. She put her hands in her lap and looked at the windshield and thought clearly and carefully about what this meant, the way she always thought about difficult things, directly, without flinching away from the parts that were complicated. Someone had talked to those boys, someone with the kind of authority that made 17-year-olds from her neighborhood pick up and move without arguing. Someone who had enough reach to find out about an incident at a bodega on Morris Avenue that she had never told anyone about out loud. She had told no one. She had not gone to the police. She had not mentioned it to Patrick or Leon, or anyone at the restaurant. She had told no one. She sat in the car with her hands in her lap. After 11 minutes, she got out and walked into the restaurant. She tied her apron. She picked up her order pad. She went to her first table and smiled and said good evening, and asked if they would like to hear the specials. She was angry. She had reached for the anger the way you reach for a coat you have worn so long you know exactly where it hangs. Quick, familiar, sure. The anger was cleaner than the alternative. The alternative was something she did not have a name for, something that sat in her chest in the place where gratitude and fear and confusion had all tangled together into a feeling she did not know how to hold. Anger she knew. Anger had kept her moving when other things stopped working. She carried it through the rest of the shift like it was something she owned. But under the anger, very quiet, in a part of herself she did not examine directly, she already knew that she had not been as invisible as she thought. She had not been unseen. And something about that, something about the specific fact of being seen, clearly, by eyes she had been trying not to notice seeing her, had already begun to change something inside her that she had not given permission to be changed. She did not let this show. She never let anything show, but it was there. Patrick told Elena on a Wednesday afternoon, while pretending to look at the reservation system, that Mr. Reyes would be in that evening, and would be staying late to work. This was not something Patrick had ever told her before. She looked at him. He looked at the screen. She said okay, and went back to prep. She thought about it all through the dinner service. The restaurant was full. A good night. The kind where everything moved well and the kitchen was on time, and you didn't have to apologize to anyone. She worked the floor cleanly and efficiently, and in the back of her mind, constant and low, the thought sat, he will be here when this ends. By 10:30 the tables had cleared. The other servers clocked out. Patrick did something Elena had never once seen him do in 7 months. He came to her quietly, told her to lock up when she was done, and left. He handed her the keys, and left. She stood holding the keys for a moment. Then she went to clear the last 2 tables. Dominic was at the back table with a ledger open in front of him, a pen in his hand, and a cup of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago based on the way it looked. He was not on the phone. He was not in conversation. He was working alone, in the way that people work when they are not performing the working for anyone. Focused, quiet, occasionally still for long stretches where he seemed to be thinking about something the ledger had raised. She brought him a fresh coffee without being asked. He looked up. "Thank you," he said. She nodded and turned to go. "Elena." She stopped. She turned back. He had closed the ledger and placed the pen beside it. He was looking at her with the collecting look, the one she had identified weeks ago, and she had the distinct sensation of being understood in a way she had not authorized. "Sit down," he said. She did not sit down immediately. She stood for a moment. He waited. No pressure, no impatience, simply waited. She sat down, not across from him, at the corner of the table, 1 chair between them, a practical distance. He did not comment on this. "You didn't take the transfer," he said. "No." He nodded. Once. Slowly. Why not? She looked at him. Because I'm good at this job. And I didn't ask to be moved. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The shadow of a recognition. Fair enough, he said. They were quiet for a moment. It was not an uncomfortable quiet, which surprised her. Most quiet with people she didn't know well had an expectant pressure to it, the sense that someone needed to fill it. This quiet just sat there, undemanding. How long have you worked 3 jobs? He asked. She went very still. I work here, she said carefully. And the bakery on Calhoun, he said. 6 to 2. And the laundry service off the Grand Concourse on weekends. She held his gaze. I don't know why you would know that. I know things about the people on my payroll, he said. It's not personal. Knowing someone's second and third job is personal, she said. He looked at her for a moment. You're right, he said. It is. She had expected him to deflect. The directness of the agreement knocked something slightly off in her, a small internal shift she had to compensate for. My brother is in school, she said, because she was not going to let that sit there without context. His school is good. I want it to stay good. That's why 3 jobs. How old? 17. Smart? Very. He nodded. He looked down at the closed ledger and then back at her. The thing about his eyes was that they were not unkind. She had expected unkindness, had looked for it, in fact, as a useful tool for managing what she felt about him. But they were not unkind. They were careful, and careful was different. Your father, he said. Not a question. A hesitation before a question. She looked at him steadily. He left. It wasn't his choice. She let a breath go. That's the whole story. She said it the way she had learned to say everything about that particular subject. Flat, final. The tone of something that has been processed and set down, and is no longer picking it back up. She watched him hear it. He did not say he was sorry. He did not tell her it must have been hard. He looked at her for a moment and then he said, You're very tired. Not as an accusation, not even as sympathy. As a plain observation. The kind you make when you have been watching someone long enough to see what they are carrying underneath the competence and the composure and the perfectly maintained surface. Something in her chest did something she did not like. I'm fine, she said. I know you are, he said, as though fine was not the same as rested, as though being fine and being exhausted were not contradictions. She looked at him, he looked at her. She said, What is this? He was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he said. And it was the most honest thing she had heard from anyone in a long time, because it was a thing that most people would not say, would give her something practiced and prepared instead, something she could evaluate and file. This she could not file. It was too open. She stood up. She picked up her order pad from the table. She straightened her uniform. Good night, she said. Good night, he said. She walked to the door, unlocked it, stepped outside. The night air was cold. She pulled her coat around herself and stood on the sidewalk for a moment before she started toward the subway. She did not look back at the restaurant. She was very careful about that. But she knew, without looking, with the same quiet certainty she had been building for weeks, that he was still at the table, working, or sitting in the specific way he sat when he was thinking about something he had not decided about yet. She thought about the question she had asked him. She thought about what he had said. I don't know. 2 blocks from the subway entrance, she slowed. She stood at a corner under a streetlight with the cold wind coming down the avenue and the sound of the city around her, and she thought about all the things she was good at. The math, the composure, the efficiency, the keeping of things in their proper compartments. She thought about the fact that she could no longer put Dominic Reyes in a compartment. She had tried. She had tried for weeks, since the envelope and the folded cloth and the rearranged section, and the thing about compartments was that they only held things that stayed still. He would not stay still. Not in her mind. He kept doing things that did not fit the category she had assigned him, and each time he did, the category got harder to maintain. She was not afraid of him. She had checked herself for this, honestly and clearly, multiple times. What she felt in his presence was not fear. That was the complicated part. She started walking again. The subway entrance appeared ahead of her. She went down the stairs into the warm underground air and swiped her card and stood on the platform and waited for the train. She thought about the way he had waited. No pressure, no impatience, when she had decided whether to sit. The small, precise space he had left between asking and expecting. The way he said, "I know you are," as though fine and tired were different measurements of the same thing. The train came. She got on. She found a seat and put her bag in her lap. She was still thinking about it when the doors closed. She was still thinking about it 3 stops later. She was still thinking about it when she got home and hung up her coat and went to check that Hector was asleep, which he was, one arm thrown out over the edge of his mattress the way he had slept since he was 4 years old. She stood in his doorway for a moment. Then she went to bed. She lay in the dark and thought, with the particular, reluctant honesty of 2 in the morning, that the last time someone had looked at her, really looked at her, past the competence and the composure and the things she kept carefully managed. She had been so young she barely remembered it. She thought about sitting across a corner of a table from a man who should have been simple to categorize, and who was not simple at all. She stared at the ceiling. She did not sleep for a long time. The word reached Dominic on a Friday morning. He was in the back office of the restaurant, a small room behind the kitchen that most of the staff had never been inside, furnished with a desk, 2 chairs, a phone, and a shelf of files that appeared to be about the restaurant, and were mostly about other things. He was reading through a set of figures when Matteo came in and closed the door behind him. Matteo had worked for Dominic for 9 years. He had seen him in many different kinds of rooms, having many different kinds of conversations, and he had developed over those 9 years a precise understanding of how to enter a room where Dominic was, and what it meant, based on Dominic's expression, to say what you had come to say quickly versus carefully. He sat down in the second chair and put both hands on his knees. "The people above have an opinion," Matteo said. Dominic set down the paper he was reading. "About what?" "About the situation." Matteo paused. "About the girl." Dominic's expression did not change. This was in itself a piece of information, because there was a difference between his face not changing because nothing was happening inside it, and his face not changing because he was keeping something off it deliberately. Matteo knew the difference. "Who raised it?" Dominic said. "Carver," Matteo said, with input from above. Carver was a man 3 levels up the structure from Dominic. Not in this city, but in the city north of here. He was methodical and careful, and liked things to be predictable. He did not like things that deviated from predictability, particularly things involving the people who worked for him. "What's the opinion?" Dominic said. Matteo told him. The opinion was delivered as reasonable, as thoughtful, as genuinely concerned for all parties. There was a transfer opportunity at a newer location, a meaningful pay increase, a clean exit from a situation that had the potential, Carver felt, to become complicated. The girl would be taken care of. Everyone would understand. These things happened sometimes, and the important thing was to manage them cleanly and without drama. "She already turned down the transfer," Dominic said. "Carver is aware," Matteo said. "He's suggesting it be presented again, with more specificity." He paused. "About what happens if she declines a second time." The room was very quiet. Dominic had his hands flat on the desk. He was looking at a point somewhere above Matteo's left shoulder, not in the way of someone who isn't listening, but in the way of someone who is processing very deliberately what they have just heard. Matteo had seen this look before. He had learned not to speak when he saw it. The clock on the wall above the door marked 45 seconds. "No," Dominic said. Matteo waited. "Her position is unchanged," Dominic said. "Her pay increases starting next week. Not a transfer. Not a suggestion. Her position is unchanged, and this conversation is finished." His voice was exactly what it always was. Flat, quiet, measured. He did not raise it. He did not make any of the gestures that would have communicated anger, because anger would have left room for negotiation, for someone to say, "You're being emotional about this. Let's be reasonable." He was not being emotional. He was being as clear as a line drawn on a floor. Matteo looked at him. "Carver won't like it." "I'll speak to Carver," Dominic said. "It's not just Carver." "I know who it is," Dominic said. "I'll speak to all of them." Matteo was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands. He was a man who had made peace, over 9 years, with many things that required making peace with, and he was trying now to make peace with the look on Dominic Reyes's face. Or rather with the thing behind the look, the thing that was making the face hold so still. He had never seen Dominic Reyes hold still for a person before. For a principle, yes. For a position, yes. For an argument, not for a person. "You understand what you're doing," Matteo said. Not a challenge, a genuine question. The kind friends ask each other when they are trying to be useful. Dominic looked at him for a moment. "Yes," he said. Matteo nodded once. He stood up. He went to the door. "She has no idea any of this is happening," Matteo said. "Good," Dominic said. "Keep it that way." Matteo left. Dominic stayed in the office for a long time after. He did not go back to the figures he had been reading. He sat with his hands on the desk and looked at the shelf of files and thought about the call he would need to make to Carver and the specific way that conversation would need to go. And then he thought about Elena Vasquez's face when she had looked at him across the corner of the table and said, "What is this?" He had said, "I don't know," because it was the truth, and because he had decided some years ago that when he did not know something he would say so rather than manufacture certainty for the comfort of the room. He still did not know what this was. What he knew was smaller and more reliable. He knew that there were people on his payroll who had worked for him for years without his knowing anything particular about them. He had never sat in a restaurant at 1 in the morning watching the quality of someone's breathing. He had never left money in an envelope without writing anything down. He had never declined a direction from Carver without a political calculation attached to it. He was not a man who did things without calculations. He was not a man who acted on impulse or feeling, or the particular specific weight that had settled in him the night he found a woman asleep in a corner booth, and stood there unable to wake her. And yet here he was. He had declined Carver. He had done it flatly and clearly and without hedging it in strategy, because hedging it in strategy would have meant it was negotiable, and it was not negotiable. This was new. This was something he did not fully recognize in himself, and instead of being unsettled by that, he found, quietly, with something approaching surprise, that he was not unsettled at all. He was, for the first time in a long time, completely certain about something. He picked up the phone. He called Carver's number. He waited through 3 rings, and then Carver's voice came through, careful and pleasant the way it always was. "Dominic," Carver said, "I was expecting to hear from you." "Then I'll make it short," Dominic said. And he did. Elena came in for her Friday evening shift at 4:30. She walked through the back door, tied her apron, picked up her order pad. She went to the floor. She did not know about the office. She did not know about Matteo, or about Carver, or about the call that had lasted 14 minutes and ended with Carver saying very well in the particular tone of a man who is not done but understands that a line has been placed in front of him. She did not know that the transfer option had come back to the table and been removed from it again, this time permanently, in a conversation where the word permanent had been used explicitly. She did not know any of this. What she knew was that Patrick met her at the door with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the avoidant look, not the nervous look, but something quieter than either of those. Something that might have been a small and cautious version of respect. "Your section is back," he said. She looked at him. "The corner booth," he said. "Back in your rotation as of today." She walked past him to the floor. She stood in the middle of the dining room and looked at the corner booth. It was exactly as it had been before. Vinyl seat, small table, the way the light from the window hit it at this hour of the afternoon, turning everything a particular shade of gold. Her corner, her booth. She stood there for a long moment. She thought about all the things she did not know, and all the things she had begun, without meaning to understand. She thought about a man at a back table who had looked at her and said, "I don't know," with the kind of honesty that cost something to deliver. She thought about the fact that the booth was back and she had never asked for it, and someone had returned it to her anyway. She thought about what it meant to be seen, what it meant to have someone look at you past the competence and the management and the perfect maintained surface, and simply see you. She thought about how frightening that was. She thought about how, in spite of everything, It did not feel the way frightening things usually felt. She went to the host stand. She picked up the menus. She set them on the tables and straightened each one carefully. The dinner service started in an hour. She had work to do. At 8 o'clock, Dominic came in. He walked to the back table, the way he always did, and sat down, the way he always did. He had no one with him tonight. He opened nothing. He just sat, very still, with his hands on the table. Elena walked over. She did not rush, and she did not slow down. "The usual?" she asked. He looked up at her. 2 full seconds, just as they had been before, just as they were every time. Careful, collecting. The look that saw more than she was offering. "Yes," he said. "Thank you." She nodded. She turned. "Elena." She stopped. She turned back. He didn't say anything else. He just looked at her, for that same steady count of 2 seconds, and then he looked back at the table. She went to the kitchen and put in his order and stood at the pass for a moment with both hands on the metal counter and let herself feel, just for that moment, just in the privacy of the kitchen, the things she had been keeping at a careful distance for weeks. It was warmer than she expected. She pushed off the counter. She went back to the floor, and when she came back through the kitchen door, for just the length of 1 step, before she put the face back on, the professional one, the composed one, the one that kept everything where it belonged, she smiled. Just for a second. Just to herself. Then she went to table 3, and she smiled for real, and asked if they were ready, and the evening moved forward the way evenings do when something is happening underneath them that nobody has named yet but everyone in the room, on some level, already feels. She did not look at the back table again. She didn't need to. She already knew he was watching. And for the first time, she did not look away from that knowledge. She just carried it forward, into the rest of the night, where everything was still uncertain and complicated and unresolved. And somehow, in a way she could not have predicted and would not have chosen, that was exactly all right.